Prologue, what they called me. Before I tell you what happened the night the Alpha King pressed his forehead to the floor before me, I want you to understand something about shame. I want you to understand it the way I understood it, not as an emotion, but as a permanent address. And for 22 years, every wolf in the Ashvale pack knew me as the girl without a wolf. That is not a small thing. Among our kind, a wolf without their inner beast is like a candle without fire. The form is there, the shape is familiar, but nothing burns. Nothing illuminates. Nothing frightens the dark. You are seen, certainly. But you are seen the way you see a cracked bowl on a kitchen shelf, still useful for carrying water. So you keep it around, but you would never serve it at a table where guests are watching. That was me, the cracked bowl. My mother died when I was 3, leaving behind no explanation and no allies. My father, Darren Voss, was a mid-ranking enforcer who had never quite forgiven me for being born without his wolf's fire in my blood. Or perhaps he had never quite forgiven himself for whatever he'd done to deserve a daughter like me. Either way, forgiveness had not been on the menu in our house on the eastern edge of Pack territory, where the land was rocky and thin, and the wind came off the mountains with a meanness that felt personal. My name is Sansa. Welcome to Sansa Romance Oracle. This is the story of a servant who was the pack's weakest only in rank, never in worth. An alpha king who found what he had been looking for in the one place he had not thought to look. And the 5-year-old ward who had known the whole time and had been quietly making sure the two of them kept crossing paths until they understood what she already understood. This story is completely original and exists only on this channel. I was assigned servant duties at age 7, the earliest the pack laws permitted. By age 12, I had mastered every corridor of the Alpha's estate, every preference of every ranked wolf who passed through it, every unwritten rule about which silver cup belonged to which elder, and what happened to the servant girl who mixed them up. I learned to be invisible. I learned to be quiet. I learned to eat what was left over, and to sleep in the space no one else wanted, and to thank the moon for even that much. And I learned, I believed, truly, deeply believed, that I was nothing. Which is precisely why the night the Alpha King walked into our territory and the air around him broke open like a cracked bone releasing its marrow. And he stopped mid-stride, turned his head in my direction, and inhaled. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I had done something wrong. Part 1. The weight of ordinary days. The morning everything changed began the same way every morning began. 4:30. The kitchen. The estate kitchen in the Ashvale Pack's main house was a long, low, ceilinged room that smelled permanently of rendered fat. Herbs hung to dry, and the particular combination of wood ash and cold stone that I had come to associate with my own reflection. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was simply the smell of invisible labor, the kind that keeps a household running and earns no ceremony. I was slicing bread when Marta, the head housekeeper, came in still pulling her robe around her. "The delegation arrives today," she said, not as a greeting but as an order. I already knew this. I had known it for 2 weeks, in the way that servants always know the things that matter most to the people they serve. Through fragments, through overheard conversations, through the tone of voice that a ranked wolf uses when something important is coming. The Alpha King of the Northern Convergence was making his circuit of the regional packs. He did it once a decade. He would be here for 3 days. Every servant had been assigned double duties. Every corner of the estate had been cleaned twice. The good silver had been polished. The best linens had been aired. "I know," I said. I kept slicing. Marta looked at me the way she always looked at me, with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt, but lived uncomfortably between them like a border town that nobody was proud of. "Keep yourself out of sight when he's in residence. High-ranked wolves from outside can be unpredictable around." She searched for the word she wanted, the one that was diplomatic enough to use in the morning, before she'd had her tea. "Around me." I finished for her. She didn't disagree. She took a cup from the shelf and held it toward me for filling. I filled it. This was the unspoken understanding that governed my life. I was tolerated because I was useful. I was kept because it cost more to replace me than to keep me. I asked no questions that required real answers. I made no demands. I took up as little space as possible, and in return was permitted to exist in the margins of a world I'd been born into, but had never quite belonged to. I had made a kind of peace with it, or something I called peace, which was really just the absence of constant screaming, internal or otherwise. After the bread was laid, and the fire was built up, and the first wave of kitchen preparation was underway, I slipped out to collect the linen bundles from the east corridor. This was the path that ran along the outside of the training yard, and most mornings it was quiet at that hour. Most mornings I could walk it alone, in something almost like freedom. That morning, I was not alone. Dagon Crest was there. Dagon was the pack's head enforcer, the position my father had once held before age and injury had reduced him to ceremony. Dagon was 26, built like something carved from a problem that refused to be solved, and he had taken a particular interest in reminding me of my place ever since he'd been promoted 2 years prior. Not in a way that left marks. He was too strategic for that. In a way that was always deniable. A shoulder that caught me in a corridor. A foot extended at just the wrong moment. Comments made within earshot that were addressed to the air, but clearly intended for me. He was standing in the yard with 2 other enforcers, and he saw me before I could change my course. His lip curved in that way that wasn't quite a smile. "Look at that," he said to the others. "Ghost girl's up early." I kept walking. I had learned that responses only extended these encounters. Silence was the shortest path through. "Don't you want to see the Alpha King when he arrives?" He called after me. "Oh wait, you'd probably make him sick. Can you imagine? He walks in and gets a whiff of nothing. A wolf with no wolf." The laughter from the other 2 was performative, the kind men produce when their superior makes a joke that isn't quite funny enough to laugh at naturally. I collected the linens. I went back inside. I stood in the small linen room with the bundles in my arms, and I breathed the way my mother's sister, the only blood relation who had ever shown me any kindness, before she'd made it away to a distant pack, had taught me to breathe when something was too heavy to carry, but had to be carried anyway. In through the nose, hold it, out through the mouth, release. I was not nothing. I said it the way you say a thing you're trying to believe. I went back to work. Part 2. The arrival. The Alpha King's convoy came through the main gate at mid-morning. And I know this not because I watched it. Servants were expected to be indoors and occupied during the formal arrival. But because I felt it. That is the only word I have for what happened in my chest when the gates opened. Felt. Not heard, not saw. Felt. In the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, in the way animals go still in the woods before a predator moves through. Every hair on my arms stood up. The base of my skull went warm. I was in the upstairs corridor, laying out towels in the guest chambers, and I stopped walking and stood perfectly still and couldn't have told you why. "Move along," said Rena, one of the other household servants, passing me with an armful of curtain panels. She was older than me by about 15 years and had the particular energy of a person who has chosen business as a religion. She didn't notice my stillness. Nobody ever really noticed anything about me. I moved along. For the next several hours, I worked in the way I always worked. Efficiently, quietly, with the particular focus that is available to people who have learned to find their dignity in the execution of small tasks when no larger dignity is permitted to them. I made beds. I polished surfaces. I carried hot water. I did not think about the warmth at the base of my skull. I did not think about it. It was still there. The formal dinner that evening was for ranked wolves only, which meant the servant staff spent those 3 hours in a controlled frenzy, carrying plates in and out, refilling cups, anticipating needs before they were spoken. I worked the far end of the long table, the end farthest from the head where Alpha Corin of Ashvale sat, and where I knew without looking directly, the way you know the position of the sun, even with your eyes closed, the Alpha King sat beside him. His name was Kalen Dravos. I knew his name from the same way I knew most things. Overheard, pieced together from fragments, assembled into a picture I was not supposed to be interested in. 30 years old. The youngest wolf ever to consolidate rule over the Northern Convergence, a territory that spanned 11 regional packs and carried more collective power than most small nations. He had done it in 5 years. He had done it without, according to the whispers, a single unlawful kill, which in our world was not so much impressive as it was practically mythological. I kept my eyes down. I carried what I was supposed to carry. I moved when I was supposed to move. And then someone at the far end of the table knocked a cup. And I stepped quickly to catch it before it tipped and spilled on the white linen. And in that moment of quick movement and stretched arm and the particular angle of catching a falling thing, in that moment, something shifted. Across the full length of the table, in a room full of wolves whose senses were sharpened to a degree that human science could not fully measure, conversation stopped. Not for long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds of silence at a table full of ranked werewolves is an eternity. I straightened, the cup caught and righted, and made myself be still and small and unremarkable the way I had been making myself still and small and unremarkable my entire life. I looked at the surface of the table. I breathed. I did not look at the head of the table. I felt, rather than saw, the Alpha King's attention move away from me, back to his conversation as water moves back from a shore. I went back to work. Later, in the corridor, Rena grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a mark. "What did you do?" she hissed. "I caught a cup," I said. She stared at me. Her eyes were strange, not angry, exactly. Something more complicated. Frightened, maybe. Or the cousin of frightened that lives next door to it. "He looked at you," she said. "I'm sure he was just..." "Sarah." She said my name with a weight that was unusual, coming from her. "The Alpha King looked at you, and he stopped talking. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I didn't. Or I did, and I wouldn't let myself. "I caught a cup," I said again. She let go of my arm. She looked at me for another long moment with that strange, complicated expression. Then she shook her head and walked away. I stood in the corridor and pressed the back of my hand against the base of my skull, where the warmth had never entirely gone away. Part 3. The garden at midnight. I could not sleep. This was not unusual. I had always been a light, restless sleeper, given to lying awake in the narrow servants' room. I occupied on the ground floor and listening to the sounds of the pack estate at night. The creak and settle of old wood, the distant sound of patrol wolves marking the perimeter, wind coming through the gap in my window frame that I had requisitioned materials to fix 3 times and been denied 3 times. But that night the sleeplessness was different. It had a texture. It was not the restlessness of an overworked body that couldn't settle. It was something more fundamental, like a compass needle that couldn't stop moving, trying to find magnetic north. At 1:15, I gave up the pretense of sleep and wrapped myself in the gray woolen blanket from my bed and went out the side door into the kitchen garden. The kitchen garden was mine, in the way that things can be yours when no one else wants them. It occupied the walled corner where the east wing of the estate met the old storage building, and it grew in the particularly stubborn way of things that nobody tends. Not wild exactly, but willful. I had spent years of stolen moments in it. It was the one place on the entire estate where I could breathe all the way to the bottom of my lungs. I sat on the stone bench in the corner, under the old fig tree, and I pulled my blanket around me, and I looked up at the moon, which was 3 days from full and already throwing enough silver to cast shadows. I didn't hear him approach. I want to be clear about that, because it speaks to something important. I did not hear the Alpha King of the Northern Convergence enter the garden through the iron gate at the far end. And I was not a wolf in full strength, but even with my limited senses, I should have heard something, footfall or heartbeat, or the displacement of air. I should have had warning. I had none. He was simply there, standing inside the gate, about 20 feet from where I sat, in a dark coat that made him almost continuous with the shadows, looking at me with an expression I had no category for. I stood up too fast and the blanket slid, and I grabbed for it, and in the process, nearly fell off the bench entirely. And when I had righted myself and gripped the blanket to my chest and turned to face him properly, my heart was making a sound like a fist against a door. "Sit down," he said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that has learned that a certain quality of quiet commands more attention than volume ever could. The voice of someone who has never, not once in his life, had to raise it to be heard. I sat down. Not because I was obedient. But not in the way he meant. I sat down because my legs had made the decision independently. He crossed the garden in measured steps and stopped about 5 feet from the bench. In the moonlight, I could see him clearly for the first time. Dark hair, close cut, a jaw that looked like a decision, eyes that in the silver light appeared to be the color of deep water. Not blue, not gray, but whatever lived between those two things. He was looking at me with an intensity that I felt in my back teeth. He said, from the table, "Yes, my lord." "You caught a cup?" "Yes, my lord." A pause. He was doing something I couldn't name. His nostrils moved, just slightly. Not dramatically. Not the obvious dramatic scenting that wolves did when they were performing strength for each other. Something subtle and involuntary. The way your eyes water in strong light before you've consciously processed that the light is strong. "What is your name?" "Sarah Voss." "My lord." Something crossed his face. Not recognition, something anterior to recognition. Like the moment before you place a song you know. "How long have you been with this pack, Sarah Voss?" "All my life." "Your parents?" "My mother died when I was 3. My father is Darren Voss, retired enforcer." The way he absorbed this information was interesting. Not with the blank courtesy of a politician receiving irrelevant details, but with a focused attention, as though each fact was a piece of a structure he was quietly assembling. "You have no wolf," he said. It was not cruelty. It was an observation, stated plainly, the way a surgeon states the extent of a wound, not to hurt but to know. "No," I said. "I have no wolf." "Who told you that?" The question landed strangely. I looked at him. "Everyone." "Who told you that first?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. The question had a shape I hadn't expected. I had to actually think about it. Trace back through the accumulated weight of 22 years of being defined by what I lacked. Try to find the original stone from which the avalanche had begun. "The pack healer," I said. "When I was 5, she tested me and said I had no wolf self. No inner beast. That it was." I paused. "That it happens sometimes. With the children of wolves who'd done something to offend the moon." His expression changed. It was subtle. Barely anything, really. Just a small tightening around the eyes and a stillness in the jaw that communicated something. I wasn't skilled at reading the faces of powerful men. I had mostly kept my face away from powerful men. But this expression seemed, to my inexperienced translation, to read something like "that is a lie," and someone told it deliberately, and I would like to know who. "Go to bed, Sarah Voss," he said. "My lord, it's cold." His eyes moved briefly to the gap in my blanket where the night air was getting through. "Go inside." I went inside. I lay in my narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and pressed both hands flat against my sternum where my heart was still doing that fist against door routine. And I thought about the question he'd asked. "Who told you that first?" Part 4, What the Blood Knows. The next morning, the pack healer was summoned to the main house. I learned this third hand, through the kitchen, specifically through Polly, who was 16 and had not yet learned that information is currency and therefore spent it freely. The Alpha King had requested a review of certain pack records. Medical records, specifically, spanning the last 30 years. I was assigned to the herb room that morning, sorting and cataloging the dried stores, a task that required patience and steady hands and no particular status, which made it perfectly suited to me. I worked through the morning, in the dusty quiet of that small room, and I tried to think about nothing but the difference between dried wolfsbane and dried nightshade, which were easy to confuse and dangerous to confuse. I failed at thinking about nothing. At noon, Marta appeared in the doorway with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "You're to go to the East study," she said. I looked up from the herbs.
"I'm sorry."
"The Alpha King's temporary office. He's requested your presence." She paused. "He used your full name, Sarah Voss, not the servant girl, or the girl from the kitchen, your full name." The full name thing mattered to her. I could tell. It mattered to people who understood the protocols of power, the particular weight that a high-ranked wolf placing a specific name on a specific person carried, as though you had been located by something that matters. "I'll go," I said. I washed my hands. I untied the apron. I tried to smooth my hair, which had the particular texture of hair that has spent all morning in a dusty room and has no intentions of being smoothed. I knocked on the door of the East study. "Come in." He was standing behind the desk, not sitting at it, a detail that I registered without knowing why it seemed important. The pack healer, old Gerda, was seated to one side. She did not look at me when I entered. She was looking at the floor with the focused attention of a woman who has been caught in something and is trying to decide how trapped she is. On the desk between them was an open ledger, the medical record book. I could see, from where I stood near the door, that certain pages were flagged with slips of paper. "Come closer," the Alpha King said. I came closer. He looked at me for a moment, and then he turned to Gerda. "Tell her." Gerda's hands tightened in her lap. She was 70 years old if she was a day, and she had the permanently alarmed expression of a woman who had lived a long time in the vicinity of powerful things and had made her peace with proximity by becoming very small. But in this moment she could not be small enough. "I'm sorry," she said. To me, not to him. "Your mother asked me, before she died." She was frightened and she made me swear. And then, after she was gone, there was no one to release me from the swear. And she stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry, child." I was very still. "Tell her all of it," Kalen Dravos said, in that quiet voice that did not need to be loud. Gerda told me all of it. My mother, Liesel Voss, Nene Ahrens, had not died of a fever, as I had been told my whole life. She had died of a choice. Specifically, the choice to bind her own wolf, self to mine, in the oldest and most forbidden form of protective magic that existed among our kind. A mother's seal, the kind of working that required a willing death. A transfer of everything the wolf, self carried, everything that marks a shifter's soul as distinct and powerful and real, poured into the child who needed it most. I had not been born without a wolf. I had been given one, a whole one, a sealed one. My mother had sealed her own beast inside me on the night she died, not because I had been born lacking, but because she had discovered what my father was planning to do with my gifts. Because she had known, from the moment I was born, and she had caught my scent in the delivery room, and gone still with a recognition that terrified her, what I was, what I carried, what it would mean if certain people in the pack hierarchy found out before I was old enough to protect myself. I was 22 years old, and I was hearing, for the first time, that I was not broken. I had simply been kept. The Alpha King watched me absorb this. He did not offer comfort or ceremony. He waited with the patience of a man who understands that some information requires its own time. "What am I?" I asked Gerda. She looked at me, and in her old face was something that might have been awe, if awe could coexist with guilt. "A scent caller," she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I looked at the Alpha King. His expression, for the first time since I'd met him, showed something unguarded, something that on a less controlled face would have been wonder. "In the last 300 years, he said, there have been 4 documented cases. Your mother knew what you were before you could walk." I sat down. I sat down because the alternative was falling down, and I had more dignity than that. "A scent caller," I repeated. The word felt old in my mouth, ancient, like pronouncing something from a language that was spoken before languages were written down. "That's what he can smell. That's what—" I stopped. I remembered the dinner table. The 2 seconds of silence. "That's what you smelled." "Yes," he said. "What does it mean? What does a scent caller do?" He came around the desk and crouched down so he was eye level with me. A gesture so unexpected, so completely outside the behavioral grammar of any ranked wolf I had ever observed, that for a moment my brain simply refused to process it. This man who controlled 11 packs and had never in his life needed to make himself smaller for anyone, crouching, looking me in the eye, as an equal. "A scent caller," he said, "carries the scent of the original bloodline, the first wolves. Every pack that exists descends from that original convergence, and the old stories say that one thing was placed in the bloodline, a living reminder of the compact between the wolves and the moon. A person who smells like origin, like home. Like the thing every wolf's instinct reaches toward without knowing what it's reaching for." He paused. "When I walked into your territory yesterday and caught your scent on the air, my wolf recognized something it has spent 30 years looking for without knowing what it sought." I looked at him. "That's why you stopped." "That is why I stopped." I was quiet for a long time. Outside the study window, the pack grounds moved in ordinary morning patterns. Wolves going about their ordinary lives, carrying the ordinary weight of who they were and where they belonged. From in here, it looked like something almost beautiful. "My mother died for this," I said. "Yes. She spent 17 years letting me believe I was broken so that I would not be found. She spent 17 years keeping you safe until you were old enough to decide for yourself what to do with what you are." He said it without sentimentality, without softening, as a fact deserving full acknowledgement in its full weight. She was not wrong that there are those who would have used it. There are those in every pack who would leverage a scent caller's existence for political purposes, as a tool, a symbol, a prize. Something in his voice on that last word made me look at him more carefully. "Is that why you're here? Your circuit of the regional packs? Is that why the timing?" "I have been looking," he said, "for 7 years. Since I first found the records in the old Convergence library that described a woman in this territory 30 years ago who was tested for the scent caller trait and whose records were subsequently sealed." The room was very quiet. "My mother," I said. "Yes, you came here looking for her." "I came here looking for what she left behind." Part 5. The unsealing What happens when a mother's seal is broken? This is not something I can describe in ordinary language, because ordinary language was built for ordinary experience, and this was not that. The pack healer had to be involved, and two of the Alpha King's own wolves, advisors who turned out to be, among their other roles, practitioners of the old workings, the kind of knowledge that most modern packs had let go to rust and disuse. They came to the herb room in the late afternoon, the four of them, and Gerda explained the process in the careful tone of someone reciting a recipe for something they have never actually cooked. It would require me to bleed, just a little. It would require the seal to be addressed directly, called by name, offered release, given permission. Because a mother's seal cannot be broken by force. It can only be opened by invitation. I stood in the herb room with the scent of 20 years of dried plants around me. The same room where I had spent my morning doing the same task I did every other morning. Unremarkable, necessary, invisible. And I said the words Gerda gave me. I said them in the old speech. The guttural syllables that feel less like language and more like the sound stone when it's hit in exactly the right place. And I will try to describe this accurately, even though accuracy fails me here. It was as though a room inside me that I had never known existed opened its door. Not a small room, not a closet, a cathedral. All that my mother had been, her wolf strength, her instincts, her 3 decades of accumulated wildness. It had been sitting inside me all along, patient and waiting in the dark, kept safe by the extraordinary act of will that had been her last breath. And now it unfolded into me the way a hand opens, the way dawn comes. Not all at once, but continuous and inevitable. I did not shift. I want to be clear about that. The first shift, Gerda told me, would come in its own time. What happened in that room was not physical. What happened was that I smelled myself for the first time. And I understood, finally, what everyone else had been sensing all along. That particular quality that had made Dagon Crest's contempt feel slightly desperate, rather than merely cruel. That had made Marta uncomfortable in ways she couldn't name. That had made a 2-second silence fall over a table full of ranked wolves. I smelled like beginning. I smelled like the thing wolves dream of without knowing the dream's name. The original territory, the first pack. The night the moon made a compact with the earth that some blood still carries. I pressed my hands to my face. I wept. Not for what I had missed. I had learned long ago that grieving the lost years of joy was less useful than being present for the years that remained. I wept for my mother, for the extraordinary fierce love that had sealed itself inside me and waited 22 years for this room in this moment. For the woman who had looked at her newborn daughter, smelled what she carried, understood what it meant, and made the hardest possible calculation. I wept for her courage. Then I wiped my face, and I breathed properly all the way to the bottom, and I turned to face what came next. Part 6. The bowing, the formal acknowledgement, took place the following morning. I didn't fully understand the protocol until it was explained to me the night before by the Alpha King's senior advisor, a composed woman named Thessa, who had the energy of someone who has arranged many complicated situations and finds the complications more interesting than the resolutions. She sat across from me in the East study and told me what would happen and what it would mean, and what I was required to do and not do. The bowing was not, she explained, a gesture of subjugation. Among the old forms, when an Alpha King acknowledged a scent caller, the bow was the opposite of subjugation. It was recognition. It was the highest ranked wolf in a territory acknowledging that some things existed above rank, that the bloodline covenant that had made all of them what they were was worthy of reverence. That power which comes from the moon's original gift cannot be owned or commanded, only honored. He will bow to you, Thessa said, not as a man bowing to a woman, as a king recognizing what you carry. Will the pack be present? I asked. Yes. I thought about this. I thought about Dagon Crest's face. I thought about Marta and her look of complicated pity. I thought about Rena in the corridor saying he looked at you with something that was nearly fear. Good, I said. Thessa looked at me with what might have been the beginning of a smile. The courtyard the next morning held everyone. I understood, watching them file in. That word had traveled. The way word always travels in a pack. Through the particular invisible network of shared instinct and overheard fragments and carefully observed body language that functions as a communication system, more efficient than any technology. They knew something had happened. They didn't yet know what. I stood at the center of the courtyard in my ordinary clothes. I had refused the ceremonial garment offered to me, partly out of the stubbornness that is the last resort of the perpetually dismissed, and partly because I wanted them to see me as I was, as I had always been. Before anything else, the girl from the kitchen, the servant without a wolf, the cracked bowl. Kalen Dravos walked out from the main door of the estate and crossed the courtyard and stopped before me. He was in full formal dress, the dark coat bearing the seal of the Northern Convergence, the rank marks at his collar. Every wolf watching understood, precisely, what that formal dress meant. He had not worn this for Alpha Corin's welcome dinner. He had not worn it for the formal inspection of the pack's perimeter. He was wearing it now for a servant girl standing in the kitchen yard in her work clothes. He looked at me. I looked at him. In his eyes was something I still cannot name completely. Recognition is too small for it, and reverence too cold, and wonder too soft. It was the look of a man who has been searching for something long enough that when he finally holds it, for a moment the reality of it outpaces all the words he had prepared for this occasion. He bent. Not a quick nod. Not the polite half bow of social ceremony. He folded at the waist in the deep, sustained bow of the old form. The kind that takes a full 3 seconds and means every beat of those 3 seconds. And when he straightened and met my eyes again, there was nothing in his expression that suggested he had found it difficult. Around the courtyard, total silence. And then, one by one, beginning with Thessa and the other members of his retinue who understood the protocol, spreading from there like the first ripples from a stone, the wolves of Ashvale Pack began to bow. Not all of them at once. Not all of them smoothly. Some with confusion. Some with the visible struggle of people recalibrating everything they had organized themselves around. Some, I noticed, with something that looked almost like relief, as though they had always known, somewhere below the words they used for knowing, that they had gotten something wrong. And this was the moment of correction. I stood in the center of the courtyard in my work clothes, and I breathed all the way to the bottom of my lungs, and I thought, "Mother, look." Dagon Crest did not bow immediately. I watched him across the courtyard, watching the rest of the pack lower their heads. He was doing a very fast and visible calculation. The kind of calculation that powerful, insecure men do when the structure that supported their power shifts without warning. He was calculating whether there was any version of this story in which he came out on the correct side. He bowed. It was stiff. It was delayed. It was the bow of a man who has swallowed something that disagreed with him and is choosing to hide the disagreement. But he bowed. I would be lying if I said that wasn't satisfying. Part 7. What comes after the story should have ended here. Here is the thing about these moments. The revelations, the recognitions, the ceremonies of acknowledgement that restructure the order of things. The stories would have you believe that this is the ending. The girl was downtrodden, then she was not. The bow was made, the music swells. We close on a face full of vindicated tears and the knowledge that everything will now be different. The truth is that the morning after the ceremony, I woke up in the same narrow room. The same gap in the window frame, let in the same cold air. The same gray blanket. The same stone floor. The same sounds of the pack estate in early morning. What was different was that I was different. Not in the ways the stories give you. Not suddenly graceful. Not suddenly confident in the easy way of people who have always been confident. Different in the way a river is different after it has finally found the course it was meant to run. Not calmer, not louder, just moving in the right direction, with the particular piece of things that have found their orientation. I got up. I made the bed with the same efficiency I had always made it. I washed my face. I put on my work clothes. And then I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment and made a decision. I was not going back to the kitchen. Not because the kitchen was beneath me. It had never been beneath me, and this is an important distinction that I want to name clearly. The dignity of necessary labor is real. The people who do it are real. I was not leaving the kitchen because I had outgrown it or transcended it, or because it turned out I was actually a princess, and princesses don't slice bread. I was leaving the kitchen because I had been placed there by force, and I had stayed there by the accumulated weight of what I had been told I was. And now that I knew what I was, now that the sealed room was open, and I could smell the full scope of what I carried, I was making a different choice. I went to find the Alpha King. He was in the East study again, already at the desk, at what could not have been later than 6 in the morning, which told me something about him. The kind of man who works at 6 in the morning because the work matters to him and not because someone is watching. I knocked. He said, "Come in." I came in. "I want to know everything," I said, "about what I am. The history, the documented cases, the old convergence records. All of it." He looked up from his papers. The particular expression I had come to recognize as his version of a smile. Not the full thing, but the geometry that preceded it, the slight shift in the lines around his eyes, appeared. "Sit down," he said. I sat down. This time not because my legs made the decision independently, because I chose to. "There is a great deal to tell," he said. "I have time," I said. "I've been clearing my schedule." The almost smile deepened. He began to talk. Part 8. The Shape of a Life Rebuilt. I stayed in the East Study for 11 hours that first day. I stayed not because I was captive or obligated, but because what he was telling me was. And I choose this word deliberately. Nourishing. After 2 years of a particular kind of starvation, of being given just enough to survive on, and told that wanting more was a fault of character, I was sitting at a table loaded with everything I had been kept from. I ate. The history of scent collars in the old records was fragmentary, incomplete, contested in some places by the deliberate erasure of those who had found the concept inconvenient to the power structures they were building. But the fragments were enough to assemble something. A scent collar was not simply a person who smelled significant to wolves. That was the surface of it. The deeper truth was that a scent collar's presence acted as a kind of living anchor, a point of stability that a pack oriented around without knowing it. Conflict within packs that housed a scent collar had, historically, been lower. Decision-making was clearer. The particular low, grade anxiety that was the background noise of pack life, the status competitions and territorial unease, and the constant management of dominance hierarchies, quieted in proportion to proximity, not because a scent collar commanded anyone, not through power or force or manipulation, simply through being what they were, a reminder, written in scent and carried in the blood, that wolves had once been one pack, one origin, one convergence. Your mother understood this, Kaelin said, somewhere in the early afternoon, which is why the wrong kind of alpha would want to control you, not for what you could do on command. A scent collar can't perform the effect deliberately. It's not a skill, it's a presence. But for what your being under their roof would mean to their wolves. The stability, the loyalty it would anchor. My father, I said. He looked at me carefully. He knew, I asked. The records suggest he suspected. Your mother may not have told him directly, but she knew he was going to use her test results for. He paused. For leverage, I said. He was building alliances. A scent collar daughter would be. I stopped. Something cold moved through me. I was going to be traded. You would have been presented as a valuable asset to a higher ranked pack. Your father's position would have increased accordingly. He said it plainly, the way he said difficult things, without cruelty and without the false kindness of softening. Your mother did the arithmetic before he could act on it. The cold thing moved through me again, and then settled into something that was not quite anger, and not quite grief, and not quite the particular, exhausted clarity of understanding something terrible that explains many other things. She saved me from him, I said. Yes. Be dying. Yes. Outside the study window, the afternoon light was going golden. Somewhere in the pack grounds, a wolf called to another wolf. A sound that was almost a howl, playful rather than urgent, the sound of young wolves at training in the late afternoon, ordinary and alive. I had lived in the margin of all of it for 22 years. The ordinary aliveness of a pack I'd belonged to without belonging to. What happens now? I asked. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was quiet when he was choosing between different versions of an answer. That depends, he said. On what you want. I looked at him. He looked at me. The late light was doing something to the quality of the air between us. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that I would allow myself to over-describe. but something. The sense of a question being asked without words, in the older and more honest language of proximity and stillness. I have spent 22 years not being asked what I want, I said. I know. He held my gaze. I'm asking now. I thought about the narrow room, and the gap in the window frame, and the cold floor, and the sliced bread, and the invisible labor, and the cup I had caught before it tipped, and the 2 seconds of silence, and the moment at the base of my skull that had started the moment he walked through the gates. I thought about my mother pressing everything. She was into the small, dark room of me, and trusting that I would, one day, have the chance to open it. I want to learn, I said. Everything in those records, every documented case, the old workings, the old convergence history. I want to understand what I am from the ground up. Yes, he said, immediately. As though this answer had been the only possible one, and he had been waiting for me to arrive at it. And then, I said, I want to figure out what to do with it. Also, yes. And I want, I said, and here I paused, not from uncertainty, but from the precise selection of words. To not do any of that from the Ashvale Pack grounds. I have been here long enough. He looked at me for a long, still moment. The Northern Convergence headquarters, he said, has a library. The one where I found the original records that led me here. It contains more material on this subject than anywhere else I know of. And it is not Ashvale territory. No, I agreed. It is not. The almost smile arrived. Properly this time, the full version. And it changed his face in a way that made me understand suddenly why his wolves followed him without fear. Not because of the power he wielded, but because of what he looked like when he was genuinely pleased about something. Like a door opened onto a room full of light. Then we leave tomorrow, he said. Unless you need more time. I thought about the narrow room, the gap in the window frame, the gray blanket. I don't need more time, I said. Epilogue. What the moon kept. There is something I want to tell you before I finish. About the morning we left. I had packed everything I owned in a bag that was, frankly, embarrassingly small for 22 years of existence. A few changes of clothes, the small carved wooden token that had been my mother's, the worn copy of a plant identification guide I had found in the estate library at age 12 and had technically stolen, and had always planned to return when I found something better to do with my time. That was it. That was 22 years of Sarah Voss, packed into a bag I could carry on one shoulder. I went to the kitchen before we left. Marta was there, as she was always there, permanent as the kitchen itself, filling the first cups of the morning. She looked at me when I came in, and the complicated expression was on her face again. The one that lived between pity and contempt, but was currently being asked to become something else. I stood in the kitchen doorway, my kitchen doorway, in the sense that I had entered and exited through it several thousand times. And I looked at Marta, and I thought about what to say. I could have said nothing. I could have left without ceremony, which would have been a dignity of a kind. But I had spent 22 years with no ceremony at all. I had earned a little. I know you were not deliberately unkind, I told her. I want you to know that I saw the difference between you and the ones who were. She looked at me. Her hands around the cup were very still. There's a gap in my window frame, I said. Third room on the ground floor, east corridor. The requisition keeps getting denied because no one senior enough has signed off on it. It's been cold in there for 3 winters. I let this sit. Fix it, I said. For whoever comes next. I walked out of the kitchen. I crossed the main courtyard with my bag on my shoulder, and the morning sun, cutting long shadows across the stones. And I did not look back, because I was not a person who needed to look back at the places that had tried to keep her small. I had done enough looking back in 22 years of lying awake in the dark. Kalen was at the convoy vehicle with Thessa and 2 other members of his retinue, and he watched me cross the courtyard, and there was that quality in his attention that I was learning to recognize as the specific way he paid attention to things he valued. Not possessive, not proprietary, but fully present, as though he had decided this particular thing deserved his complete focus, and he was delivering it without reservation. I stopped in front of him. "Ready," he said. "I have one question," I said. He waited. "When you found the records in the library, the ones about the woman in this territory 30 years ago, you said you spent 7 years looking. 7 years of a circuit that conveniently makes its way through Ashvale territory." I looked at him steadily. How much of this mission was diplomatic protocol, and how much was looking for what she left behind? The pause was very brief. "The diplomatic protocol," he said, "was entirely legitimate and served a genuine administrative function. That's not an answer to my question." Another pause, and this one had a different texture. The texture of a man deciding whether to be honest in a way that costs him some strategic reserve. 60-40, he said, in favor of looking. Something in my chest settled, not collapsed, not dissolved, but settled, the way a compass needle settles when it finds magnetic north. "Good," I said. I walked to the vehicle. He walked beside me. And I want to be careful here at the ending. Not to give you the version of this story that wraps itself too neatly in the language of rescue and romance. The powerless girl who was saved by the powerful man who recognized her worth when no one else could see it. Because that story, while it contains elements of the truth, is not the whole truth, and the whole truth matters. The whole truth is that my mother gave her life to protect a potential she believed in absolutely, and that her sacrifice was an act of love that I will spend the rest of my existence honoring. The whole truth is that I survived 22 years of being told I was nothing, because some part of me, small and stubborn and burning low, like a coal in a banked fire, never entirely believed it. The whole truth is that Kalen Dravos didn't give me my worth. He recognized something that had always been there, sealed in the dark, waiting for me to open the door from the inside. He bowed to my scent, but I had been carrying it all along. The vehicle moved through the Ashvale Pack gates and onto the road that led north, toward the convergence and the library and the old records and the long work of understanding what I was and what to do with it. The sun was fully up by now, burning off the morning cold, and the road ahead was the kind of road that looks longest when you've just gotten on it, and looks longest and best when you're the one who chose to take it. I didn't look back. The moon, which had no interest in the daytime politics of roads and records and convergence headquarters, made no particular appearance. But I felt it, the way I had always felt it, that particular silver weight behind my breastbone that I had always explained to myself as sleeplessness or anxiety, or the particular ambient grief of a life lived at the margins. I understood now what it actually was. Recognition. Coming from the moon toward the thing it had placed in my blood, reaching across the daylit sky with its perpetual, wordless patience, saying the thing it had been saying all along. There you are. I wondered when you'd open the door. If the moment Wren crossed the formal gathering hall and said the scent does not ask permission, a 5-year-old addressing a council member in a room full of adults with 8 months of quiet certainty. If that reached you, you are the person I make these stories for. My name is Sansa, written and narrated by me. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.